Yeah, no, but what you say makes sense because the essentially business ownership and entrepreneurship is about solving problems, identifying holes where there's pressure points, and stress testing your business so that before you get to the point where the pipe bursts, you're relieving the pressure already.
So next month, let's put 8 instead of 5, 8 instead of 5. And now we projected it out so that we have a real true number that we're actually going against. And that's so big. The fact that you're actually taking your forecasted number and comparing it to your actual is a step that majority of business owners out there are not doing right now. And that's why I made that comment. And it's like that you're doing that. That is one of the biggest steps that you can make to really kind of guide the ship, because you need to look at it as it's happening and kind of make adjustments for it. If you have a company retreat, let's say that you're remote like we are and have a company retreat, and you're going to spend $2,500 to $3,000 a person on this company retreat, and you have one, let's say in May, and you have another one in October, right? About 6 months apart. And so you're going through that May one, and you're like, man, we're spending way too much money in this retreat here. Well, now you need to know that, hey, in October, I need to do one of two things, right? I need to either increase the amount of money I think we're going to spend in that one, or go to the opposite, say, you know what? We spent a lot of money in May. We're going to cut down in October. And so you make those adjustments right there and then. And that's really the key of forecasting, because you're constantly making adjustments, but you're not doing it just on a whim, right? You're basing it on, basically dynamic information, true numbers that you can look at to make those wise decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point. And cash flow is a manager's game. And there are entrepreneurs, they're the idea people who put the structure in place, that are able to build the ecosystem of what they want, like very effectively. And so they're able to build these businesses that they work on in theory and on paper, but the problem comes down to when the rubber meets the road, right? So a manager's game, cash flow is always a manager's game. Who can manage the best has the best cash flow. So how do you manage the assets that you have in place? I wanted to make a comment on something you said earlier. So I own a brick and mortar business. And so what we do to manage cash flow is we have it broken down to operational hours. So what we've done is we've taken our gross rent for the year, which is how they calculate all rent anyway, commercially. We've taken taxes. We've taken, our fixed costs for a 12-month period, insurance. We've divided it broken all the way down per day, per operational hour, so that we know per hour what we need to make. That's a little nerdy for most people, and most people won't do that. I get it. You probably really like that idea because you're probably a nerd like me, right? But the point is, like, if a business owner, small business owner, entrepreneur were to do that, you really understand how much you need to make per operational hour. So how many per operational hour is how many hours, if you're watching this, you don't understand the concept, how long you're open for business in a 24-hour period, right? That's an operational day. And then if you're only open for 8 hours, each hour of those 8 hours is an operational hour. So if you divide everything into that put all your fixed cost, does not include variable costs, but put all your fixed costs, then you're going to be more likely, super accurate to how much you need to charge your customers, how much you need to market, and how often you need to market, and how much capital you need to spend there.
Yeah, and you do the same thing with production-based companies that are service-based. For instance, we do a lot of creative agency space where they're developing the big websites and all that kind of stuff, and we'll break it down by employee, so we know exactly the utilization percentage. How much time are they actually working on projects, what their average billable time is. For a lot of them, whether they're flat fee or whether they're hourly bill, we still have a good idea what that billable time is. And we can break it out and say, XYZ employee should be producing $200,000 to that bottom line. And in order to get that, we know that you've got to be able to manage that effectively. The average, and we can break it down by employees. You can break it down by every single employee, and you can look at employees and look at it and say, why is everybody doing great, but Micah, you're lower in everything. So then we can dig in and see, hey, is this an education issue? Is it a software issue? Is it something that Micah is doing a little differently? We kind of work and help Micah bring that information back up. And so, just like you're saying there, you can break it down overall company wise, like you just said, which is brilliant. Or you can break it down even at a more granular level where, what each person should actually be producing and use it as a tool to help them out and help bring the whole ship up with just kind of looking at that information.
That's actually really smart because it allows you to know if your capital applied to the human labor is actually earning you a return on your investment. So like, in economics, I know that most people don't think this way, which is that what a person is really giving you when they come to work for you is they're selling their labor to you in the market. That's really what's happening. And so what a company is doing is that they're hiring people. They're actually buying labor from an individual. Now, whenever you buy, in theory, what should happen in the business market is the business owner should be buying labor and there should be a return on that labor. And so what you're saying is that how you look at it in those production-based service companies, which I love this model, you can see directly if you're paying someone $80,000 salary, whether or not they're meeting that ROI on the $80,000 salary, and then take corrective action. So this is a situation where the quantitative data, like the numerical data, is driving the qualitative data, which is more like the survey and interview style data, which is like you take that, you go back to the employee and you say either your production was down, or oftentimes these take the form of like an annual performance review. Why were we so off kilter with kind of what we did, and how do we right the ship? And then from there, there's like the tough conversation: do we keep this employee on? Are they actually making the money back? So numerically, if we're just talking about quantitatively, what you all provide in being a virtual CFO service is you already can take a look at a person's books. So the business model, right? You can take a look at the profit of a company or how much money they're generating. You already know before you even sign on a client your ROI for this client based off of how you perform and what you can do for them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's because
brilliant.
Yeah, we know the numbers, right? And so, like, if you're looking at a person, you want to basically at least double the amount of money that person's bringing in, right? So the cost wise, and so you could break it out, just by taking the person's total overall cost. Let's say the person's salary is $100,000, they've got another $20,000 in burden, the benefits and all that kind of stuff. So $120,000. So we know that we want to make at least $240,000 on that client. So you can even break it out by hours and say, 2,080 hours is how many working hours in a year. If you take, the 40 hours times 52 weeks, that's your 2,080. And you can say, hey, you know what, take that overall cost number, divide it by 2,080 hours. Then you can do the same thing and take that overall revenue and divide that by 2,080 hours. So you can see exactly where you're at on a dollar per hour basis, and you can make those corrective actions like you'd mentioned. So no different than what you did by taking it all the way down to the very bottom. We're doing it at the higher level so that we can actually have a better control over it. Because with most service-based companies, your labor is your biggest expense. That's where you're gonna make or break it. It's not what you spend on dues and subscriptions and the accounting fee or the attorney fee or anything like that. That's just down below. That's just kind of helping you survive. But that dollar amount's way up there. And so that's like when I tell somebody that, hey, they ask me, how much should I be charging an hour? And it's like, well, really the first question I ask, well, how much do you charge? How much do you pay for your employees? Because if I'm offshoring my entire team, well, I've got a huge advantage. I might be paying my employees $25 an hour instead of, $50 an hour, $60 an hour. Well, my revenue could be a lot different. It's like, well, there we go. So now I can charge less than what somebody that's my competitor right across the street that's charging. Or I can have the opposite. I could say, I got the most expensive team ever because they're brilliant. They're doing all this great stuff. Well, I better be charging enough money to compensate for that brilliancy. It shouldn't be the $125 an hour that everyone else is charging. It better be a premium. It better be the $150 or the $160 or the $200. Because you want to be able to recoup that same percentage based on the team that you're putting out there to represent your company.
So there's typically three kinds of employees: revenue generating employees, employees that service revenue, So existing customers and then employees who support the functions. And so like your methodology of breaking down some of these aspects of how a company thinks about where to apply pressure should also go into what types of employees that you should actually hire first.
Right.
And in my opinion, that's a big black hole for small business owners oftentimes. Who do I hire first? And I'm sure you've seen this when you've had client meetings. It's like, well, why do you have 5 middle managers and you have one person driving in revenue, right? Like low hanging fruit here. Either lay off half your middle managers because probably 2 of them could do all the work, or you can hire more revenue generating employees and have them generate it, and have your managers actually just, again, managers manage cash flow, but you also need to generate the revenue in order to manage it. So it's like, do you find that building a team as a in the construction of like work teams is like a fatal flaw to some of these companies?
Oh, 100%. Because they're an entrepreneur. They love what they're doing. They think everybody else wants to be an entrepreneur, which is completely false. And they get to a point and they say, you know what, here's my 5 best producers. These folks, Mary, she's freaking awesome. And Barb, she's great. And Bob, awesome. I'm gonna promote these folks and they're gonna be my managers now because they are the best producers ever. And they do that. And what happens is they find out that maybe Mary and Barb and Bob, maybe they don't want to be a manager. Maybe they've never managed before. Maybe that's just not their cup of tea. They love being the producer. It's a huge flaw where we're so quick to get to that middle management area that we lose sight of, what got us there. Maybe we need to bring an outside person there. Maybe Bob needs to be half producer, half manager, or gradually move into that manager role. And you're right. People get to that point, and I see that. It's funny because I see that right when they hit about $2 to $3 million between the $5 million mark. People do that all the time. They just jump right in there and say, you know what, here's my new team, and then they find out their new team isn't maybe as good. Now they're kind of stuck because they've got their 5 best producers, all managers. And now what do? They can't put them back down there. That's a demotion, right?
That's right.
Or can you? Maybe you can. Or do you have to get rid of your 5 best producers because they're not great managers? So it really puts the owner in a real kind of a pickle when it comes to that. And so it's be wary of that. I mean, as any business owner, as you're scaling, don't just assume that your best producer is going to be your best manager or be the next owner of your company, because they may not want anything to do with that. And as an entrepreneur, that's hard to believe because you'd think everybody, of course, wants to be the owner. In reality, not everybody does.
There are certain positions in a company that are just not made to drive revenue, and that's okay because it's all part of a larger ecosystem. Now, if you're really a thinking person who's building a company, and now, okay, that's probably a little smug. I didn't mean that. So if you're a person who, I did mean it, because don't be a non-thinking person, but you should be, which is why you're watching this. So if you're a thinking person, you're going to take this piece of advice that I've just thought about now, and maybe Jody can speak to it in a minute, which is, how long can you go without investing in functions in your business that don't drive revenue, positions or jobs in your business that don't drive revenue or contribute to increasing your net income or your gross income, right? And can you maintain your organization, your firm, as long as you can before you start adding in support functions? And at some point, the producers that you're talking about are these individuals who are bringing in the revenue that often have to be serviced. Okay, so here's a question, because sometimes I get tangential. Do you have a formula that you use that corresponds to when an employee is making X amount of money, that now it's time to bring in a support function for this particular person or this department? Is it like 4 times, for instance, to produce a salary because now there's a support function attached to it? When do you typically suggest that there's a support function attached to, or support employee attached to a person who's bringing in cash?
Yeah, that's kind of hard one to say from business to business, but typically we say that an employee should earn about 4 times their salary is what you want to shoot for. So if you're a service-based company,
full-time employee, right?
Excuse me?
Full-time employee?
Yeah, full-time employee. Yeah,
Yep.
4 times there. And so I would think as soon as that you see that that's actually happening, they're starting to go higher than that. That's when you need the support to go along with it to bring it off of them. And so when we built our company, we based it and said, you know what, every CFO has to be able to manage $1.5 million book of business. And obviously they can't manage that without having the team below them. And so they start out with 600,000 and they're building their team, and we keep adding people to their team so that they can actually manage that $1.5 million book of business. And the nice thing about it is if you do it in the right way, like you're mentioning, it can be done, and the stress isn't there on the company. The problem is that every company is a little different. You've got to kind of figure out what that stress level really is. I wish there was a mathematical formula, at least that I knew of, that would say, hey, when you get to that 3, then you move it. Maybe there is out there, and I just don't know what it is. But I think you have to kind of gauge each company by itself. And the reason why I say that is there's a principle out there, or a law, that's called Parkinson's law. And what that means is that if I'm going to work to the capacity that I've got time. And so if I've got one company that let's say that I'm managing, let's just look at the Summit model here. Let's say I'm managing one client, and I that's the only client I have. Guess how many hours I'm going to put in that client? 40. I'm going to work 40 hours. I'm going to work my butt off. I'm going to think, oh my gosh, this is great. And then guess what? Jody just gave me another client. So now I've got 2 clients. Well, guess how many hours I'm going to work total for those 2 clients? 40. So now I figured it out, and I'm thinking, okay, so I'm figuring out some efficiencies and I'm working it out. I don't need help yet, right? Because I've got everything covered, right? And so Jody, all of a sudden, he's like, oh, you're doing such a great job. I'm going to give you 2 more clients. And so now it's like, oh, geez, I got 4 clients now. And I'm like, okay, so I'm busting my butt. Guess how many hours I'm working? Not 120 hours. I'm working 40. And it continues on because you develop the efficiencies, you figure out what's important. Then you get to a point where, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I've got 8 clients now, and I'm doing everything myself. I'm truly thinking I might have to work more. So guess what you try to do? You start leveraging people. And so that's when you start to leverage. And with that leverage, you're teaching people how to do your job. And that's the key to anybody's success is become irrelevant. Be Mr. Irrelevant or Mrs. Irrelevant. Make your job so that somebody underneath you can do it. And you're pushing stuff down to that person. You're training them. You're not abdicating. You're delegating, right? You're teaching them how to do that job right, and you're overseeing them. And so now Jody comes through and says, I got 2 more clients for you. Like, I can handle 2 more clients, no problem. And so you're going through. So now you've built your book of business that way, and you got 15 clients. And you're thinking, I'm thinking, man, can he do any more? And all of a sudden he comes up to me and says, you know what? Give me 2 more clients. I am ready to go. I got this thing humming. I've got my processes in place. I'm figuring it out. And guess how much time he's putting into it? 40, 45 hours a week, that type of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And that's all part of that Parkinson's syndrome, or not syndrome, but Parkinson's law, is that, you figure out how to work within that time constraint. It doesn't just add hours to it. You figure it out. And so that's what every business owner has to do, right? They've got to figure out what is the tipping point for the team. Is it, hey, can they work on 8 trucks solid, or can they work on 6? And that's the tipping point. And that, whatever the tipping point is, you've got to figure out, hey, this is what the team can do. And don't base it on one person, because everybody's a lot different, right? My capacity is a lot different than your capacity, is a lot different than the next person's capacity. So you've got to look at a person by person basis to get an overall, but then you can kind of blend them all in and say, yeah, typically this is how we do it. And then you kind of develop that support staff underneath them. So I would be very hesitant to say, hey, there's a formula that's going to say, hey, X equals Y plus Z, because Parkinson's law is going to take completely the opposite. Had we started it out and I said, you know what, a CFO can only handle $600,000. That's it. I know it's it. Well, guess what? Today, a CFO would only handle $600,000.
Right. Yeah.
Because I self-imposed a law or a principle that is based in falsehoods. And so that's why you've got to understand what can that person actually do. And that's the beauty of working on a value-based pricing or a flat fee pricing, because you figure out all those different things versus an hourly bill. You just do it and you charge the client and you never get better, that type of thing. So efficiencies are the key to that. So like I said, I wouldn't necessarily go formula based.
Yeah.
If there's one great, I'd love to know what that is. But
Well, but what you say makes sense because essentially business ownership and entrepreneurship is about solving problems, identifying holes where there's pressure points, and stress testing your business so that before you get to the point where the pipe bursts,
Yep.
you're relieving the pressure already. I developed a stress test for business owners, and it doesn't address things like financials specifically because
Sure.
I mean those things are, I hate to say easy, but they're easy. It's just numbers. Numbers don't change. So
Right.
I built the stress test because it's like if you don't understand how your business is supposed to work, and if you can't build a functioning, if you can't scaffold a business that works from a good foundation, then it's just a house of cards, and then everything comes falling down. And the next thing you know, you're having to rob Peter to pay Paul to get the person in to do stuff and work at the last minute to try to make it work. And then it becomes a fire drill versus just something that you had already prepared for.